Hey everyone, talking about the differences between EDT, Eau de Toilette, Parfum, Extrait, Eau Fraiche, Cologne, all these different things that people throw around, and both in terms of the technical differences and how I think those actually play out in reality. So, honestly, the differences in terms of taking this into account with what you're buying don't. I would just say honestly don't because there's been so many times that I've tried one that was say called an eau de toilette that had much better projection and longevity than one that was marketed as a parfum, for example. That often is, I mean, sometimes at least it is going to be the case that say like a parfum is going to be a lot stronger than an eau de toilette, but I would not go off that in and of itself. I would check stuff like Fragrantica, what the reviews of other people saying stuff about the specific scent that you're interested in, if that's an important concern for you in terms of the projection or longevity, because this is just they're just thrown around too indiscriminately. But here's what each one technically means. Again, this might not always be true for when they're calling it that, but just the dictionary definition. So an eau fraiche has a concentration of the fragrance of only 1 to 3%, tends to be more water-based rather than perfumer's alcohol-based, and usually lasts about 1 to 2 hours, supposedly, for that mix. What's also confusing here is that eau fraiche can also just mean that it's like, a flanker that's a fresh flanker of the other one. Like there's a Lacoste eau fraiche something or other, and it's not like it has a 1% concentration. They're just using that name to mean that it's like a fresher version, and that's pretty. I actually see that more often than I do of people actually making real eau fraiches that have such a low concentration. So don't be scared off if you see that in the name. It doesn't, it just often means that it's just fresh. It doesn't automatically mean that it's actually that type of eau fraiche. Next up, Eau de Cologne. This has a fragrance concentration of 2 to 6% and usually wouldn't last more than a few hours. This can also be really confusing to people because cologne is, at least in the States, it sounds like this might not be the case so much in other countries around the world, but cologne is used as a generic term to mean masculine fragrances or fragrances that are marketed to men, when in actual reality, the definition of that in terms of what that means in the fragrance has nothing at all to do with anything like that. And it's just about the concentration level of fragrance, which tends to be really, really low. Or like very classic eau de colognes, which literally started from Cologne, Germany, which is what it's named after, would be like 4711 cologne. Those, old school ones, they often had like lavender, neroli, rosemary, kind of like classy stuff like that. And they usually don't last that long, but they tend to be pretty fresh. But if something is called, a cologne, usually it could just mean they're marketing it as a masculine thing, or it could mean, in the case of say like Joe Malone colognes, that they're telling you, like it has a low concentration, so don't expect good longevity from it, basically. Next up, Eau de Toilette, EDT, fragrance concentration of 5% to 15%, and supposedly average lasts around 2 to 4 hours. So many things are just marketed by default as an Eau de Toilette. And I say by default, but they probably do really have a concentration that fits within that. But just because something's marketed as an eau de toilette does not mean like, okay, I'm only going to get 2 hours out of this. Not at all. There could be ones that are terrible and you get less than that, 30 minutes maybe. But there also are plenty eau de toilette that could last 10 hours or more. So again, check stuff like Fragrantica, check other things like that. Don't just go off of say, eau de toilette, that means it's not going to have good projection or longevity. Next up, Eau de Parfum, 15 to 20% concentration, supposedly lasting around 5 hours. So that's the technical definition. In terms of how it's usually used, what I see it used as most is just to name a flanker, basically. So say that Tom Ford Noir whatever, then Tom Ford Noir Eau de Parfum, like something like that. But it's not, I used to think this when I didn't know as much and hadn't learned as much about this stuff, like, oh, that means it's basically the same scent as the Eau de Toilette version, but a stronger one. That would actually be pretty cool if they did that. Like, I like how the Fragrance House commodity, they'll have different versions of each scent that are kind of like, for people who want ones with, just like a close scent bubble, for people who want one bigger, and for people who want it to like fill a room. But that's not the case at all with how Eau de Parfum is typically used in a name. It's basically just a way for them to make more money and put something out under the same name. There's plenty of times they do not smell very similar whatsoever, that you would never guess it was from the same line. Not always the case. There's totally ones where it does definitely smell similar, but don't go into it expecting like, okay, I like this one, but I wish it was stronger. Ooh, I'll just blind buy the Eau de Parfum because it's going to be like that, but stronger. Because it might not smell anything like it, first of all. Second, it might not be any stronger in terms of the actual projection and longevity. So, as always, I just really highly recommend sampling, getting a decant of something to try it before shelling out a lot of money for the full bottle, because so much of this stuff, can go either way. And then lastly, Parfum, also called Extrait de Parfum. And that, they kind of try to confuse people with that sometimes too, because it can sometimes look like Parfum is one thing and then Extrait de Parfum is another, but they're actually like the same category. Those have a concentration of anywhere from 15 to 40% of the fragrance. Rarely are they actually something like 40% though. Usually it's more like around 22% or something like that from the ones I see where they disclose the alleged percent of the fragrance in it. Supposedly typically lasts 6 to 8 hours, but that also doesn't really make sense with the scale, because a really, high projecting and longevity fragrance is going to last way more than 6 hours for something that would be considered like, wow, this has amazing longevity. People don't say that, and they're talking about 6 hours, not usually. For me, I'm fine with that if I get 6 hours out of a fragrance, but for someone to say, including me, like, oh, the longevity on this is, whoa, it's incredible. I don't see people say that meaning 6 to 8 hours. They probably mean like at least 8 hours, and really more like 10, 12 the next day or something like that. But don't expect that just because something is called an extrait. I've tried ones that were marketed like that, and they didn't have any better projection longevity. Again, sometimes they totally do, and I'm not even saying they're always lying about the percent, but also just because something has a higher percent of the fragrance doesn't automatically mean that it's going to have major projection and longevity. Like, for example, say you had one fragrance that was an Eau de Toilette at 15% concentration, and then you had an extrait at 25% concentration, but maybe just the scent profile or something else about the Eau de Toilette made that one a lot stronger. And like, yeah, the extrait, if they're honest about the percentage of the fragrance, is usually going to smell like a bit richer. It's usually going to look a bit visibly like slicker on and more noticeable on your skin. Like, it'll dry out and whatever. It's not going to stay like that, but that can be a way to tell too, like how high the concentration is. It almost looks like not oily, but sort of like when you spray it on there. So yeah, bottom line, as I've probably repeated this like 30 times in here already, but don't just go off of that. If your number one concern is projection and longevity, don't just look for extraits thinking like, okay, because either one, you might be disappointed, you're going to get some stuff that doesn't have what you're looking for. Two, you're going to be writing off a lot of stuff that you actually probably would have loved and would have given you good projection and longevity. So basically, I would say if something is specifically marketed as an Eau de Cologne, in that case, yeah, usually it is going to have pretty low projection and longevity. But for any of these other ones, it's just kind of a toss-up in terms of what it's actually going to be like on your skin when it's an extrait versus, an EDP, Eau de Parfum, or whatever else. So, yeah, the best thing you can do is just check other reviews, check the ratings on Fragrantica and Parfumo and Base Notes and all those other kind of sites for what other people say about projection and longevity, if that's a concern to you, and not just go off of this, because, and I've bought into it too. Like I said, when I, didn't understand some of the differences here, I would totally get wrapped up in that. And I don't even care about projection and longevity that much, but I would still be like, oh, okay, that's going to be a really richer version, or like, things like that. And it's just, I see now time and time again, that's just not true. So yeah, but if you have any thoughts on this, let me know. But for me, this is kind of how I feel about it. And at this point, I'm just like, I don't care what it's called. If they come out with a new flanker that's the extrait version of such and such, and I like the original one, I totally want to try it. I just want to try anything I can at this point. But like, okay, it's probably, hopefully it's going to be a little bit similar, or maybe something like that. But it's just not good to assume. And this, again, goes with sort of the philosophy about why blind buying can often backfire. But I think these are the main ones. If there's any that you think I missed, let me know. But these are the ones that kind of get thrown around the most that I see.